I never imagined my perfect wedding day would end with me standing in front of 200 guests, holding my fiancé's phone, and revealing a truth that would change everything. The look on everyone's faces as I spoke into the microphone, shock, disbelief, horror. I'll remember it forever. But it was my response, the words I chose in that moment, that truly left them speechless. The morning had started like a fairy tale at the Grand Laurel Hotel, a historic venue overlooking the Pacific. Rays of sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling. Windows of the bridal suite, casting a golden glow across my ivory dress. My sister Rachel was adjusting my veil while my best friend Olivia carefully arranged the cascading bouquet of white peonies and blue delphiniums. The excitement in the room was palpable, the culmination of 18 months of planning, of building a future with Nathan, the man I thought I'd spend forever with. We'd met at a charity fundraiser 3 years ago, where he'd charmed me with his wit and genuine interest in my work as an environmental lawyer. Our relationship had blossomed naturally, filled with shared dreams and easy laughter. "You look absolutely radiant," my mother whispered, tears glistening in her eyes as she fastened our family's antique pearl necklace around my neck. The pearls had graced the necks of 4 generations of brides in our family, each one carrying their own stories of love and commitment. The warmth of the moment was interrupted by a gentle knock at the door. It was David, Nathan's best man, his face unusually pale. "Sorry to interrupt, but Nathan's asking for his phone. He says he left it in here earlier while dropping off the wedding bands." I glanced around the room, spotting Nathan's distinctive phone case on the vintage vanity. "Oh, here it is," I said, reaching for the device. As I picked it up, the screen lit up with an incoming call. The name that flashed across it made my blood run cold. My love. I stared at the screen, confusion clouding my mind. Nathan had me saved in his contacts simply as Grace. This was someone else. The phone continued to vibrate in my hand, each pulse sending shockwaves through my body. David's eyes widened as he too caught sight of the caller ID. I'll just take that to him," David stammered, reaching for the phone. But I held on to it, my fingers refusing to let go. The call ended, only to be immediately followed by a text message preview that shattered my world. "Baby, I can't wait to see you tonight after your wedding is over. Remember our plan." The room fell silent. My mother's hand found my shoulder, steadying me as I swayed slightly. Olivia and Rachel exchanged worried glances, their earlier joy evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. "Grace," David began, his voice heavy with what sounded like guilt. "I think you should know." My hands trembled as I unlocked Nathan's phone. He'd trusted me with his password months ago, a gesture of transparency that now felt like a cruel joke. With each swipe, each message I read, the beautiful world I'd built with Nathan crumbled around me. The messages revealed a relationship spanning months, filled with secret meetings and elaborate lies. But what struck deepest was their plan for today, my wedding day. Nathan intended to go through with the ceremony, securing his position at my father's law firm while planning to continue his other life on the side. I felt my knees weaken, but something inside me hardened. A clarity I'd never experienced before washed over me. The panic and hurt transformed into an ice-cold resolve. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, the expensive dress, the carefully styled hair, the hopeful glow of a bride on her wedding day, and made a decision that would shock everyone. "David," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "Please tell the band to set up the microphone. I have an announcement to make." My mother gasped. "Grace, sweetheart, maybe we should think about this." But I was already moving toward the door, Nathan's phone clutched in my hand like evidence at a trial. "No, Mom. Some things need to be said, and trust me, everyone needs to hear this." As I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking against the marble floor, I felt strangely calm. Behind me, I could hear the rustle of my bridal party following, their whispered concerns fading into background noise. The weight of the phone in my hand seemed to grow with each step, but my determination grew stronger. I was about to turn my dream wedding into something entirely unexpected. And while my heart was breaking, my spirit was preparing to soar. The Grand Laurel's ballroom was a vision in white and silver, exactly as I'd planned it. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across 200 faces, all turned expectantly toward the entrance where I'd soon make my appearance. Through the partially open doors, I could see the flower arrangements we'd spent months selecting. Towering arrangements of white roses and silver-dusted eucalyptus that seemed to touch the ceiling. My father waited anxiously by the doors, his bow tie slightly crooked, a detail I would have fussed over just moments ago. Now, it seemed insignificant compared to the weight of Nathan's phone in my hand and the devastating truth it contained. Dad reached for my arm, ready to begin our walk down the aisle, but I stepped back. "Sweetheart?" he questioned, his eyes searching my face. "Are you having last-minute jitters?" I smiled sadly, touching his cheek. "Daddy, I need you to trust me right now. What I'm about to do, it's necessary." The band had just finished, setting up the microphone at my request, casting curious glances in my direction. The wedding planner, Vanessa, rushed over with panic written across her face. "Grace, darling, we're 20 minutes behind schedule. The guests are getting restless and Nathan is already at the altar." "Nathan," I whispered, his name tasting bitter on my tongue. Through the doors, I could see him standing there in his tailored tuxedo, checking his watch with apparent concern. He looked exactly like the man I'd fallen in love with. Confident, handsome, seemingly perfect. But now I saw him differently, like a beautiful painting revealed to be a forgery. Olivia appeared at my side, her bridesmaid's dress rustling softly. "Grace, are you absolutely sure about this? We could handle this privately after the ceremony." I turned to face my best friend, seeing the worry etched across her features. "Do you remember what you said to me the day Nathan proposed? You said I deserved a love story for the ages." I held up his phone, the evidence of his betrayal safely documented in its memory. "Well, this is going to be a story no one will ever forget." The wedding planner was now frantically waving to the string quartet, trying to keep them playing as the delay stretched on. I could see Nathan's mother in the front row, her expression growing increasingly annoyed. She'd never quite approved of me, claiming I wasn't from the right sort of family despite my father's successful law practice. I wondered if she knew about her son's deception, if she'd helped him maintain his perfect facade. Rachel appeared with a glass of water, pressing it into my hands. "Drink this," she insisted. "Whatever you're planning to do, you need to be clear-headed." As I sipped, my sister's steady presence beside me felt like armor. She'd always been my protector, from playground bullies to college heartbreaks. Now, she stood ready to support whatever decision I made. Through the doors, I caught a glimpse of David, Nathan's best man, shifting uncomfortably at the altar. The guilt in his eyes, when he'd seen the phone screen earlier, told me he'd known about Nathan's betrayal. How long had he helped cover up the lies? How many other people in this room were complicit in this elaborate deception? My mother approached, her face pale but composed. "Grace, darling, I've known you since the moment you took your first breath. You've never backed down from what you believed was right, even when it was difficult. Whatever you decide to do, your father and I are behind you." I straightened my spine, feeling the strength of generations of strong women flowing through the pearls around my neck. My grandmother had worn these same pearls when she'd left her first fiancé at the altar after discovering his gambling addiction. She'd gone on to meet my grandfather and build a beautiful life. Perhaps history was about to repeat itself, but with my own twist. The wedding coordinator was now practically dancing with anxiety. "Grace, please, we need to start." The schedule is about to change," I interrupted, my voice calm and clear. I handed my bouquet to Rachel and stepped toward the doors. Vanessa, please ask the band to stop playing. I'd like to make an announcement before we begin. The murmur of conversation in the ballroom began to die down as guests noticed the change in music. Nathan turned from his place at the altar, his expression shifting from concern to confusion as he saw me standing in the doorway, microphone in hand instead of my bouquet. I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The path ahead was unclear, but I knew with absolute certainty that I was about to do the right thing. My hands were steady as I raised the microphone, my voice clear as crystal as I spoke the words that would change everything. I'd like to thank you all for coming today. What you're about to witness isn't exactly the ceremony we planned, but I promise you, it's going to be unforgettable. A heavy silence fell over the Grand Laurel's ballroom as I stood in the center aisle, still wearing my wedding dress, but no longer feeling like a bride. 200 pairs of eyes focused on me, friends, family, colleagues, all dressed in their finest, expecting to witness a celebration of love. Instead, they were about to witness something entirely different. Nathan's face had drained of color as he watched me from the altar. His right hand kept reaching for his pocket, probably just realizing his phone was missing. The sterling silver band he'd chosen as my wedding ring glinted mockingly in the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. First, I began, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. I want to apologize to everyone who traveled to be here today, especially those who came from across the country, Aunt Beth from Chicago, the Hendersons from Seattle. I paused, making eye contact with various guests. What I'm about to share might shock you, but I believe we all deserve the truth. Nathan took a step forward, his handsome features arranging themselves into a mask of concern. Grace, darling, are you feeling all right? Maybe we should talk privately. Oh, we're well past private conversations, Nathan. I held up his phone, watching his face transform as recognition dawned. You see, about 20 minutes ago, you sent your best man to retrieve this. But before he could, you received a very interesting call. Would anyone like to guess who from? The crowd remained silent, but I could see Nathan's mother shifting uncomfortably in her front row seat, her perfectly manicured hands clutching her designer purse. Next to her, Nathan's father had developed a sudden interest in his shoes. The call, I continued, my voice growing stronger, was from someone saved in Nathan's phone as my love, which I found rather interesting, considering I'm saved simply as Grace in his contacts. I turned to face Nathan directly. Would you like to explain that to everyone, or should I keep going? Grace, you're making a scene, Nathan hissed, taking another step toward me. Whatever you think you saw. What I think I saw? I pressed the screen of his phone, bringing up the messages. Let me read you what I know I saw. This is from 3 days ago. Baby, I can't wait until this weekend is over. Once you're officially part of the firm, we can finally stop hiding. Just get through the ceremony and meet me after. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. I saw David, the best man, close his eyes in resignation. He'd known all along, probably covered for Nathan countless times. The weight of that betrayal would have crushed me earlier, but now it only fueled my determination. There's more, I announced, scrolling through the messages. Apparently, Nathan and his love have been planning this for months. The wedding, securing his position at my father's law firm, all while maintaining their relationship on the side. Very efficient, really. 2 lives for the price of 1 wedding. Nathan's face had turned from pale to red. That's enough, he shouted, striding down the altar steps. But before he could reach me, my father intercepted him, placing a firm hand on his chest. I suggest you stay right there, son, Dad said, his voice low and dangerous. I'd never seen such cold fury in my father's eyes. I turned back to the audience, many of whom were now whispering among themselves. I considered many ways to handle this discovery. I could have quietly called off the wedding. I could have pretended. I never saw these messages, married Nathan, and lived with the knowledge of his betrayal. Some might say that would have been the dignified choice. My eyes found my grandmother in the second row, her face proud despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. The pearls around my neck seemed to grow warmer, stronger. But I think we've all had enough of dignity that conceals deceit. I think it's time for honesty, however uncomfortable it might be. I lifted my chin, looking directly at Nathan. So here's my honest truth. I deserve better than a man who treats love like a business transaction. I deserve better than someone who would use my family's name and reputation for his own gain. And, most importantly, I deserve better than you. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone began to clap. The sound spread like wildfire until applause filled the ballroom, punctuated by a few cheers and whistles. Nathan's face had turned almost purple. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled, taking a threatening step forward despite my father's restraining hand. "Actually, I know exactly what I've done," I replied calmly. "I've chosen myself. I've chosen truth over convenience, self-respect over social expectations. And I've chosen to start my new life right now, instead of living a lie with you." With deliberate movements, I removed the engagement ring from my finger. The 3-carat diamond that had once symbolized so much now felt as fake as Nathan's promises. I placed it and his phone on the nearest table, the soft click of metal on wood echoing in the hushed room. "The reception will still be held in the garden," I announced to the stunned crowd. "Consider it a celebration of truth rather than a wedding. There's no reason to waste all this wonderful food and champagne." I turned to the band. "And I believe I promised you could play whatever you wanted after 9. Feel free to start that policy early." As the first notes of music filled the air, I turned and walked back down the aisle, head held high. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting. Nathan's shouts, his mother's dramatic sobs, the excited chatter of guests. But I didn't look back. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows caught the pearls around my neck, creating a rainbow of colors that seemed to light my path forward. The bridal suite had transformed from a room of joy to a sanctuary of chaos in the span of an hour. My perfectly pressed veil lay discarded across a vintage armchair, the delicate lace catching the late afternoon sun. The pearls, now removed, from my neck, rested safely in their velvet box, a symbol of strength rather than tradition. Through the closed door, I could hear the muffled sounds of the reception beginning in the garden. The band had taken my suggestion to heart, playing upbeat songs instead of the romantic ballads we'd carefully selected months ago. Somewhere in the distance, Nathan's voice still carried, demanding to speak with me. "I've instructed security not to let him anywhere near this wing of the hotel," Olivia announced, entering the room with 2 glasses of champagne. She handed one to me, her eyes bright with a mixture of concern and pride. "You should have seen his face when the guard escorted him out of the main hall. Priceless." I accepted the glass, taking a small sip. The same champagne that was meant to toast our union now tasted like victory. "How are the guests handling everything?" "Honestly," Rachel chimed in, slipping into the room, "they're loving it. Half of them are sharing videos of your speech on social media. The other half are in the garden, enjoying what might be the most talked about non-wedding reception in history." She paused, checking her phone. "Oh, and Uncle Robert says this is better than any reality TV show he's ever watched." A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, the first genuine laugh since discovering Nathan's betrayal. It felt strange, almost inappropriate, but somehow right. At least they're getting their money's worth of entertainment. My mother entered next, carrying a garment bag. Her eyes were red-rimmed but fierce with maternal pride. "I've brought you something to change into, sweetheart. As beautiful as that dress is, I think it's time for something new." Inside the bag, was a sleek emerald green cocktail dress I'd bought on impulse last month but never worn. Looking at it now, it seemed perfect, as far from bridal as possible while still being celebration-worthy. Nathan's mother is making quite a scene in the lobby, Mom continued, helping me out of my wedding dress. Something about suing for emotional distress and demanding refunds for their portion of the wedding costs. She rolled her eyes. Your father's handling it. Rather enjoying himself, actually, reminding her that Nathan's betrayal constitutes fraud, given his intentions with the firm. As I slipped into the green dress, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different, stronger, more certain, somehow more herself than the bride who'd stood here just hours ago. "Grace," Olivia said softly, "David's outside. He wants to speak with you." My hands stilled in the act of adjusting my dress. David, Nathan's best man and our friend for years, who'd known about the deception all along. "What did you tell him?" "That he could go to hell," Rachel answered promptly, but I shook my head. "No, I'll speak with him." I squared my shoulders. I think I need to hear what he has to say. When David entered, he looked like a man walking to his own execution. His bow tie hung undone around his neck, his usually immaculate hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. "Grace, he started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "I don't even know where to begin." "How about the truth?" I suggested, my voice calm but firm. "How long have you known?" David sank into the nearest chair, his shoulders slumping. 6 months. I caught them together at his family's beach house. He swore it was a one-time thing, that he was ending it. I wanted to believe him. Then 3 months ago, I realized it was still going on. But he kept saying he would end it after the wedding, after he made partner at the firm. "And you thought that made it okay?" Olivia interjected, her voice sharp. "No," David replied quietly. "No, it never felt okay. I've been Nathan's friend since college. I thought I owed him loyalty. But watching you today, hearing those messages, I realized I've been loyal to the wrong person all along." I studied him for a moment, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. "You know what the worst part is, David? Not that you kept his secret, but that you watched me plan this wedding for months, watched me believe in a future that you knew was built on lies." "I know," he whispered. "I'll never forgive myself for that. But Grace, what you did today, standing up there, speaking your truth, it was incredible. You showed more courage in those few minutes than Nathan and I have shown in our entire lives." A knock at the door interrupted us. The wedding planner, Vanessa, poked her head in. "Grace? The garden reception is in full swing and people are asking for you. Apparently, several of the guests have prepared impromptu toasts in your honor." I couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. My wedding reception had transformed into a celebration of truth and self-respect, with the bride but no groom, and guests toasting to endings rather than beginnings. "Well," I said, straightening my green dress, "we shouldn't keep them waiting." I turned to David. "You should go. I think we all need time to process everything that's happened today." He nodded, standing slowly. "For what it's worth, Grace, you deserve so much better than what Nathan and I did to you. I hope someday you can forgive me." As David left, my mother stepped forward with a tissue, dabbing at my eyes before tears could ruin my makeup. "Ready to face your guests, darling." I took a deep breath, feeling the strength of the afternoon's decisions settling into my bones. You know what? I am. After all, how often does a bride get to attend her own non-wedding celebration? Rachel linked her arm through mine, while Olivia grabbed my other side. Together, we moved toward the door, ready to embrace whatever came next. The sound of laughter and music drifted up from the garden, carrying with it the promise that sometimes the best celebrations are the ones we never planned for. The Grand Laurel's garden had been transformed into something magical as the sun began to set. String lights twinkled overhead like stars, casting a warm glow across the gathering. The wedding decoration remained, white roses and silver eucalyptus gleaming in the fading light, but somehow their meaning had shifted. No longer symbols of a fraudulent union, they now decorated a celebration of truth and self-worth. As I descended the garden steps in my emerald green dress, flanked by Olivia and Rachel, a spontaneous round of applause erupted. The faces turned. Toward me held none of the pity I'd feared. Instead, I saw admiration, respect, and genuine warmth. My Uncle Robert raised his champagne glass in a silent toast, while my young cousin Emma beamed at me as if I were some kind of superhero. "Ladies and gentlemen," the band's lead singer announced, "here she is, the woman of the hour." The crowd parted as I made my way through, different voices calling out support. "You're an inspiration, Grace. Now that's what I call courage. Show them what you're made of, girl." I found myself at the center of the dance floor, where the first dance should have taken place. The original song Nathan and I had chosen, Perfect by Ed Sheeran, had been replaced with something upbeat and empowering. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Grace," my father appeared at my side, his bow tie now completely undone, a glass of scotch in his hand. "I just finished dealing with Nathan's family. Let's just say they won't be troubling us with any lawsuits." His eyes twinkled. Though I must admit, I rather enjoyed reminding Bradley that attempting to fraudulently gain access to a law firm through marriage could be considered a criminal offense. A burst of unexpected laughter escaped me. "Dad, you didn't." "Oh, but I did. And you should have seen his face when I mentioned that as managing partner, I would be obligated to report such ethical violations to the Bar Association." He wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Nobody messes with my little girl." The catering staff had rearranged the dining setup, transforming the formal wedding breakfast into an elegant cocktail party. The elaborate 5-tier wedding cake had disappeared, probably at Nathan's mother's insistence. But in its place, the pastry chef had arranged an artistic display of desserts, each one topped with an edible flower. You know, my grandmother appeared looking regal in her navy blue dress. This reminds me of what happened at my first almost wedding, though I must say, your exit strategy had significantly more style than mine. She fingered the pearl necklace I'd returned to her. "I simply left a note and ran away the night before. You stood up and claimed your power. I couldn't be prouder." As if on cue, the band started playing "I Will Survive." Several of my college friends squealed in delight, pulling me onto the dance floor. The choreographed first dance Nathan and I had practiced for months was forgotten as we formed a circle, laughing and singing along. Across the garden, I spotted the wedding photographer looking uncertain. Poor thing. Her shot list for the day had probably been completely derailed. I waved her over. "I know this isn't what you were expecting to document today," I told her, "but would you mind staying? I think this is a celebration worth remembering." She grinned, raising her camera. "Are you kidding? This is the most authentic wedding reception I've ever photographed. The joy in this garden is real, and that makes for the best pictures." As the evening progressed, the formal wedding schedule dissolved into something organic and genuine. Instead of ceremonial toasts from the wedding party, guests stood up spontaneously to share words of support and admiration. My mother's best friend Sandra, who'd been through her own divorce 20 years ago, raised her glass with tears in her eyes. "To Grace," she declared, her voice carrying across the garden, "who reminded us all that true love starts with loving yourself enough to demand the truth, who showed us that sometimes the happiest endings come from choosing yourself, and who turned what could have been a day of deception into a celebration of authenticity." The words touched something deep inside me, and I felt tears threatening. Again. Olivia squeezed my hand, while Rachel pressed a fresh glass of champagne into my other hand. "You know what the best part is?" Rachel whispered in my ear. "Nathan's mother can't demand a refund for the bar tab. They already paid for all this premium champagne." Looking around at the joyful faces, the dancing, the laughter, I realized something profound. This day that I'd thought was ruined had instead become something far more meaningful than the wedding could have ever been. It was a declaration of self-worth, a celebration of truth, and most surprisingly, a moment of genuine happiness. A distant rumble of thunder caused everyone to look up at the sky, where clouds were gathering despite the earlier perfect weather forecast. Someone quickly began organizing the movement of the party into the hotel's grand ballroom. But there was no panic, no stress. Even the threat of rain couldn't dampen the remarkable spirit of this unprecedented celebration. As I helped carry centerpieces inside, I caught my reflection in one of the hotel's grand mirrors. The woman in the emerald dress looked nothing like the bride I'd been just hours ago, but she looked real, strong, and surprisingly content. Sometimes I realized the best moments in life are the ones we never planned for, and the strongest versions of ourselves emerge from the moments we thought would break us. The chaos that erupted in the Grand Laurel's ballroom felt like a fever dream. As I stood there, still gripping the microphone that had just delivered my truth to 200 stunned guests, I witnessed the room divide itself. Like oil and water, separating, people instinctively chose sides. There was no middle ground to be found in this moment of raw revelation. Nathan's family formed a tight cluster near the altar, his mother's face contorted with rage as she whispered furiously to anyone who would listen. His father, always the politician, was already working the room, trying to control the damage. But it was the reactions of others that truly caught my attention, the ones who stepped forward instead of away. My sister Rachel materialized at my side first, her bridesmaid's dress rustling as she wrapped a protective arm around my waist. The gesture was so familiar, so reminiscent of countless childhood moments when she'd stood between me and whatever threatened to hurt me. "I've got you," she whispered, and in those 3 words, I felt the first crack in my carefully maintained composure. Olivia appeared next, her face flushed with a combination of anger and fierce loyalty. She'd already kicked off her heels, ready for whatever might come next. "Your overnight bag is still in my car," she said quietly. "We can be out of here in 5 minutes if that's what you want." The offer of escape was tempting, but something kept my feet planted firmly on the marble floor. Perhaps it was the weight of my grandmother's pearls around my neck, or maybe it was the growing chorus of support I could feel building around me. My father, who had always been the epitome of professional restraint, surprised everyone by walking straight up to Nathan. Instead of the explosive confrontation many probably expected, Dad simply looked at him with such profound disappointment that Nathan actually took a step backward. "I welcomed you into my home," Dad said, his voice carrying in the tense silence. "I was prepared to trust you with my firm's legacy, but more importantly, I was prepared to trust you with my daughter's heart. You've proven yourself unworthy of both." The quiet dignity of my father's words seemed to carry more weight than any shouting could have. I watched as Nathan's face drained of color, the reality of what he'd lost finally beginning to sink in. My mother's response was equally powerful but entirely different. She moved through the crowd with the grace of a diplomat, speaking quietly to shell-shocked guests, ensuring everyone was taken care of despite the dramatic turn of events. Even in crisis, she remained the consummate hostess, but there was steel beneath her smile. When Nathan's mother attempted to approach me, Mom intercepted her with a look that could have frozen hell itself. "I believe you've done quite enough. Damage for one day, Caroline," she said, her voice arctic. "The exit is that way." But it wasn't just family who rallied around me. My college roommate Jessica, who had flown in from Seattle for the wedding, immediately started gathering other friends into a protective circle. My cousin Emma, barely 16, was furiously typing on her phone, and I later learned she was shutting down the wedding's social media accounts, preventing any nasty comments from Nathan's supporters. Even the vendors, who had no personal stake in this drama, chose sides. The band's lead singer caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod before launching into an impromptu version of I Will Survive, instead of the romantic first dance song we'd planned. The photographer, a woman I'd only met twice before, quietly showed me she'd captured photos of Nathan's angry reaction to my announcement. Evidence, she whispered, in case we needed it later. What struck me most was how many of Nathan's own friends seemed unable to look him in the eye. His college roommate Mark slipped away quietly, leaving an envelope I later found contained a letter of apology. He'd known about the affair but hadn't known how to tell me. Even David, who'd been Nathan's best man and confidant, stood frozen halfway between us, his face a mask of conflict before he finally turned and walked to my side of the room. I should have told you months ago, David said, his voice rough, with emotion. I convinced myself it wasn't my place, that Nathan would come clean on his own. I was a coward, and I'm so sorry, Grace. The weight of all these revelations, these shifting loyalties and emerging truths, threatened to overwhelm me. My carefully constructed walls began to crumble, and I felt tears threatening to spill. But before I could break down, my grandmother appeared, her aged hands cool against my cheeks as she turned my face to meet her eyes. Now listen to me, Grace Elizabeth, she said, using my full name the way she always did in important moments. What you're feeling right now, that mix of humiliation and relief, of grief and freedom, I felt it too, 60 years ago when I left your grandfather's predecessor at the altar. The difference is, you had the courage to speak your truth out loud. You didn't slink away in shame. You stood your ground and demanded better. And that makes you stronger than I ever was. Her words acted like a catalyst, crystallizing something inside me. Yes, my perfect day had shattered, but look at what had risen from the pieces. This incredible network of love and support, this army of people who chose truth over comfort, justice over convenience. Each person who stepped forward to stand with me helped steady my trembling hands. Each word of support helped clear my vision of tears. The irony wasn't lost on me that this moment of crisis had revealed more about love than any wedding ceremony could have. Not the romantic love I'd thought I was celebrating today, but something deeper. The unwavering love of family, the fierce loyalty of true friends, the strength of a community that refuses to be complicit in deception. As I looked around at all these faces turned toward me with concern and support, I realized that while Nathan's betrayal had broken my heart, it had also shown me just how many people were ready to help put it back together. And somehow, that knowledge made me feel not smaller but larger, not weaker, but stronger. I wasn't just a bride whose wedding day had been ruined. I was a woman surrounded by an unshakable support system, discovering that sometimes our worst moments can reveal our greatest strengths. The storm was far from over. I could see that in the way Nathan paced at the edges of the crowd, in the angry whispers of his family, in the shocked faces of guests still processing what they'd witnessed. But for the first time since I'd seen that fateful message on his phone, I knew with absolute certainty that I would weather it. Not alone, but surrounded by a circle of strength I hadn't even known I had. The chaos that erupted in the Grand Laurel's ballroom felt like a fever dream. As I stood there, still gripping the microphone that had just delivered my truth to 200 stunned guests, I witnessed the room divide itself. Like oil and water separating, people instinctively chose sides. There was no middle ground to be found in this moment of raw revelation. Nathan's family formed a tight cluster near the altar, his mother's face contorted with rage as she whispered furiously to anyone who would listen. His father, always the politician, was already working the room, trying to control the damage. But it was the reactions of others that truly caught my attention. The ones who stepped forward instead of away. My sister Rachel materialized at my side first, her bridesmaid's dress rustling as she wrapped a protective arm around my waist. The gesture was so familiar, so reminiscent of countless childhood moments when she'd stood between me and whatever threatened to hurt me. "I've got you," she whispered. And in those 3 words, I felt the first crack in my carefully maintained composure. Olivia appeared next, her face flushed with a combination of anger and fierce loyalty. She'd already kicked off her heels, ready for whatever might come next. "Your overnight bag is still in my car," she said quietly. "We can be out of here in 5 minutes if that's what you want." The offer of escape was tempting, but something kept my feet planted firmly on the marble floor. Perhaps it was the weight of my grandmother's pearls around my neck, or maybe it was the growing chorus of support I could feel building around me. My father, who had always been the epitome of professional restraint, surprised everyone by walking straight up to Nathan. Instead of the explosive confrontation many probably expected, Dad simply looked at him with such profound disappointment that Nathan actually took a step backward. "I welcomed you into my home," Dad said, his voice carrying in the tense silence. "I was prepared to trust you with my firm's legacy. But more importantly, I was prepared to trust you with my daughter's heart. You've proven yourself unworthy of both." The quiet dignity of my father's words seemed to carry more weight than any shouting could have. I watched as Nathan's face drained of color, the reality of what he'd lost finally beginning to sink in. My mother's response was equally powerful, but entirely different. She moved through the crowd with the grace of a diplomat, speaking quietly to shell-shocked guests, ensuring everyone was taken care of despite the dramatic turn of events. Even in crisis, she remained the consummate hostess, but there was steel beneath her smile. When Nathan's mother attempted to approach me, Mom intercepted her with a look that could have frozen hell itself. "I believe you've done quite enough." "Damage for one day, Caroline," she said, her voice arctic. "The exit is that way." But it wasn't just family who rallied around me. My college roommate Jessica, who had flown in from Seattle for the wedding, immediately started gathering other friends into a protective circle. My cousin Emma, barely 16, was furiously typing on her phone, and I later learned she was shutting down the wedding's social media accounts, preventing any nasty comments from Nathan's supporters. Even the vendors, who had no personal stake in this drama, chose sides. The band's lead singer caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod, before launching into an impromptu version of "I Will Survive," instead of the romantic first dance song we'd planned. The photographer, a woman I'd only met twice before, quietly showed me she'd captured photos of Nathan's angry reaction to my announcement. "Evidence," she whispered, "in case we needed it later." What struck me most was how many of Nathan's own friends seemed unable to look him in the eye. His college roommate Mark slipped away quietly, leaving an envelope I later found contained a letter of apology. He'd known about the affair but hadn't known how to tell me. Even David, who'd been Nathan's best man and confidant, stood frozen halfway between us, his face a mask of conflict before he finally turned and walked to my side of the room. "I should have told you months ago," David said, his voice rough, with emotion. I convinced myself it wasn't my place, that Nathan would come clean on his own. I was a coward. And I'm so sorry, Grace. The weight of all these revelations, these shifting loyalties and emerging truths, threatened to overwhelm me. My carefully constructed walls began to crumble, and I felt tears threatening to spill. But before I could break down, my grandmother appeared, her aged hands cool against my cheeks as she turned my face to meet her eyes. "Now listen to me, Grace Elizabeth," she said, using my full name the way she always did in important moments. "What you're feeling right now, that mix of humiliation and relief, of grief and freedom, I felt it too, 60 years ago when I left your grandfather's predecessor at the altar. The difference is, you had the courage to speak your truth out loud. You didn't slink away in shame. You stood your ground and demanded better, and that makes you stronger than I ever was." Her words acted like a catalyst, crystallizing something inside me. Yes, my perfect day had shattered, but look at what had risen from the pieces. This incredible network of love and support, This army of people who chose truth over comfort, justice over convenience. Each person who stepped forward to stand. With me helped steady my trembling hands. Each word of support helped clear my vision of tears. The irony wasn't lost on me that this moment of crisis had revealed more about love than any wedding ceremony could have. Not the romantic love I'd thought I was celebrating today, but something deeper. The unwavering love of family, the fierce loyalty of true friends, the strength of a community that refuses to be complicit in deception. As I looked around at all these faces turned toward me with concern and support, I realized that while Nathan's betrayal had broken my heart, it had also shown me just how many people were ready to help put it back together. And somehow, that knowledge made me feel not smaller, but larger, not weaker, but stronger. I wasn't just a bride whose wedding day had been ruined. I was a woman surrounded by an unshakable support system, discovering that sometimes our worst moments can reveal our greatest strengths. The storm was far from over. I could see that in the way Nathan paced at the edges of the crowd, in the angry whispers of his family, in the shocked faces of guests still processing what they'd witnessed. But for the first time since I'd seen that fateful message on his phone, I knew with absolute certainty that I would weather it. Not alone, but surrounded by a circle of strength I hadn't even known I had. They say there's a moment of calm before a storm breaks, a deceptive stillness that lulls you into thinking the worst has passed. Standing in the Grand Laurel's ballroom, surrounded by my protective circle of family and friends, I almost believed I'd weathered the worst of it. I was wrong. The text message alert on Nathan's phone, still clutched in my hand, shattered that illusion. Another message from my love lit up the screen. "Baby, they're saying something's wrong at the wedding. What's happening? Should I come there?" The audacity of it, the sheer brazenness, made something snap inside me. All the composure I'd maintained, all the dignity I'd tried to preserve, evaporated in an instant. This wasn't just about Nathan's betrayal anymore. It was about the complete dismantling of everything I thought I knew about my life. "She wants to know if she should come here," I announced, my voice carrying across the now hushed ballroom. "Your other love, Nathan. She's worried about you." The words tasted like poison on my tongue, but I couldn't stop them. "Should we invite her? Make it a real party?" Nathan's face contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. He lunged forward, breaking free from the groomsmen who'd been subtly containing him. "Give me my damn phone, Grace," he shouted, his carefully maintained facade of sophistication crumbling completely. My father stepped between us, but Nathan was beyond reason. "You had no right," he continued, his voice rising to a near scream. "You've ruined everything! Do you have any idea what you've done? The connections, the opportunities, all gone because you couldn't just play your part." Play my part. The words hit me like physical blows. Every memory of our relationship suddenly shifted, recolored by this new lens. Every romantic gesture, every seemingly spontaneous moment of affection, had they all been calculated moves in his elaborate game? "My part?" I repeated, and I barely recognized my own voice. "Was that all I was to you? A part to play? A stepping stone to the life you really wanted?" "Oh, don't act so shocked," he sneered, and in that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time. "You think your father would have made me partner without this marriage? You think your family's connections didn't matter? We all play our parts, Grace. Some of us are just better at accepting reality." The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs. My mother gasped. My father's face darkened with a fury I'd never seen before. But it was my grandmother who moved first, stepping forward with such authority that even Nathan took a step back. "Reality?" she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Let me tell you about reality, young man. Reality is that you've just admitted to fraud in a room full of witnesses, many of whom are lawyers. Reality is that you've destroyed not just your relationship, but your entire career in the span of 5 minutes. Reality is that you're finished. In this town. Nathan's face went from red to white in an instant. He looked around the room, seemingly realizing for the first time how many influential people had just witnessed his confession. His father had already left the room, phone in hand, damage control no doubt already in progress. But I barely registered any of it, because another text had come through. Nathan, please answer me. Remember our promises. Remember what we planned. My hands shook as I opened the message thread, scrolling up through months of correspondence. The further I read, the more I felt the floor dissolving beneath my feet. It wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated long-term plan. They had discussed everything: how to secure my father's trust, how to handle the wedding, even how to manage their relationship afterward. My entire engagement had been a carefully orchestrated fraud. There were never going to be any children, were there? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We had talked about having kids, had even picked out names. That was all part of the act too? Nathan's silence was answer enough. The last thread of what I thought we'd had snapped completely. The weight of it all, the betrayal, the lies, the complete erasure of what I thought was real love, crashed over me like a tidal wave. My knees buckled. Rachel caught me before. I could fall, but nothing could stop the sound that tore from my throat. Part scream, part sob, pure anguish. It echoed off the elegant walls of the ballroom, bouncing back to me like a stranger's pain. Get him out, my father commanded, and several of the male guests moved to comply. Nathan didn't resist this time. Perhaps he realized he'd finally shown too much of his true self, had finally crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. As he was led away, he turned back one last time. I did love you, Grace, he said. But the words sounded hollow, rehearsed. Just another line in his ongoing performance. No, I replied, finding strength in the simple truth of it. You loved what I could give you. There's a difference. The doors closed behind him with a final sounding thud. In the silence that followed, I became aware of the tears streaming down my face, of the death grip I still had on his phone, of the way my entire body trembled with emotions I couldn't even name. The carefully constructed world I'd built with Nathan lay in ruins around me, but as I looked at the pieces, I realized something important. They weren't just fragments of what was lost, but also the raw materials for something new. Something real. Something that would be built on truth rather than lies, on strength rather than performance. I let the phone fall from my fingers, leaving it lying on the marble floor like the prop it had always been. The sound it made as it clattered against the stone felt like punctuation, the final period at the end of this chapter of my life. The next hour passed in a blur of sensations and fragments, like pieces of a broken mirror, each shard reflecting a different aspect of the aftermath. The wedding planner, Vanessa, had ushered me into what she called the crisis bride room, a small but elegant parlor adjacent to the main ballroom. I'd never known such a room existed, but apparently, every high-end wedding venue had one. The thought that wedding day crises were common enough to warrant a dedicated space struck me as darkly funny, and I found myself laughing. A high, slightly hysterical sound that quickly transformed into deep, racking sobs. Olivia and Rachel flanked me on a velvet settee, while my mother paced the ornate Turkish rug, phone in hand, taking charge of the situation with military precision. I've spoken to the hotel manager, she announced, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. They're clearing Nathan and his family from the premises. Security will ensure they don't return. The catering staff wants to know about the reception, Vanessa interjected gently. Everything's prepared, and the garden is already set up. The thought of all that food, all those carefully chosen details, the signature cocktails named after Nathan and me, The personalized place, cards with our initials intertwined, made my stomach lurch. Cancel it, I started to say, but my grandmother's voice cut through the chaos. Absolutely not, she declared, settling into a wingback chair with regal authority. That garden reception represents thousands of dollars of your parents' money, and I'll be damned if we let Nathan's betrayal waste a single penny more. She fixed me with the same stern look she'd used when I was a child trying to quit piano lessons. Besides, there's something to be said for facing this head-on. My mother paused her pacing. Mother, surely Grace needs time to— What Grace needs, my grandmother interrupted, is to show everyone that she's not hiding in shame. She has nothing to be ashamed of. She turned back to me. When I left Harold Bishop at the altar 60 years ago, I ran away to my aunt's house in Connecticut and hid for 3 months. It was the biggest mistake I could have made. It let people think I was the one who had something to hide. The room fell silent as I processed her words. Through the window, I could see guests milling in the garden, their formal attire bright against the lush greenery. Some were already leaving, but many remained, clustering in small groups, no doubt discussing the dramatic turn of events. The food, I said suddenly, my voice hoarse from crying. We chose everything to be served in pairs. The twin lobster, tails, the duo of beef and fish, the side-by-side cake flavors. Each menu item had been selected to represent our union, our supposed partnership. Then we'll serve it differently, Rachel declared, her pragmatic nature shining through. The lobster becomes individual portions. The beef and fish become choosing your own adventure. The cake. She paused, then smiled wickedly. Well, I say we let people smash the groom's cake. Could be therapeutic. A fresh wave of tears spilled down my cheeks, but these felt different, cleansing rather than devastating. My sister's practical approach to dismantling the wedding's couples theme somehow made everything feel more manageable. I can't wear this, I gestured to my wedding dress, the ivory lace suddenly feeling like it was suffocating me. I can't face everyone looking like a bride, Olivia finished softly. I have your green cocktail dress in my car. The one you bought last month for the rehearsal dinner, but decided was too bold. Too bold. I'd chosen a safer, more traditional option because Nathan had said the emerald green was a bit much. Just another small way he'd shaped my choices, I realized. Get the dress, I decided. The statement felt like my first real decision of the day, the first choice that was entirely my own. As Olivia hurried out, my father entered the room. He looked older than he had this morning, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his voice was firm. The situation with Nathan's father has been handled, he said. Bradley won't be causing any problems at the firm. In fact, he's tendering his resignation, effective immediately. Daddy? I started, guilt washing over me. I never meant to cause problems at work. No, he cut me off, kneeling in front of me despite his expensive suit. You didn't cause anything. Their actions, their choices, those are the problem. You just had the courage to expose the truth. He took my hands in his. I've never been prouder of you than I am right now. A knock at the door revealed David, Nathan's former best man, looking uncomfortable but determined. Grace? There's something you need to know. About Nathan's plans, about how long this has been going on. Not now, my mother intercepted firmly. Whatever revelations are left can wait until tomorrow. Right now, Grace needs to breathe. She was right. My head was spinning with everything that had already been revealed. Each new piece of information felt like another weight added to an already crushing load. What I need, I said, surprising myself with the clarity of my voice, is to wash my face, change my dress, and face every single person out there. I need them to see that I'm not broken. I stood up, my legs shaky but holding. I need them. To understand that discovering the truth, no matter how painful, is better than living with a lie. My grandmother nodded approvingly. Now that sounds like a woman who knows her own mind. As Olivia returned with the green dress, I caught a glimpse of myself in the parlor's gilded mirror. My carefully crafted bridal makeup was streaked with tears, my elegant updo falling in loose strands around my face. But my eyes looked clearer than they had in months. Perhaps this was what clarity cost, the destruction of illusions, the pain of seeing truth in all its harsh light. "Help me out of this dress," I said to Rachel. "It's time to stop being the bride who was betrayed and start being the woman who refused to settle for lies." The sun was setting over the Grand Laurel's gardens, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed almost offensive in their beauty. From the private balcony of the Crisis Bride Room, now transformed into my sanctuary, I watched the day fade while wearing my emerald green dress, a symbol of my first true decision of the day. The fabric felt lighter than my wedding gown, both literally and metaphorically, as if changing clothes had somehow helped me shed the weight of expectations I'd been carrying. My mother had managed to clear the room of well-meaning supporters, leaving me alone with my thoughts for the first time since the revelation. The silence felt both terrifying and necessary, like the moment after diving deep underwater when you're not sure which way is up, but you know you need to figure it out. Quickly, I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. The first time I met Nathan at that charity fundraiser, the way he'd seemed so genuinely interested in my environmental law work. Had that all been calculated too? Had he already known about my father's firm, about the potential for advancement through marriage? The thought made me physically ill. "I brought you some tea." My grandmother's voice interrupted my spiraling thoughts. I hadn't heard her enter, but there she was, holding a delicate china cup that steamed in the evening air. "And before you say you don't want anything, this isn't a request. Some moments require tea, and this is one of them." She settled into the other balcony chair, her movements deliberate and graceful despite her age. The pearls I'd worn earlier gleamed at her throat, caught in the last rays of sunlight. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that can only exist between people who share both blood and understanding. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. The late-night work calls that he'd take in another room, the way he'd get defensive if I dropped by his office unexpectedly. Even the fact that he never wanted me to post pictures of us on social media. He said it was about privacy, but now I wonder. "Now you wonder if his other life would have seen them," my grandmother finished. "It's a peculiar form of torture, isn't it? This looking back, this re-examining of every moment, trying to pinpoint exactly where the lie began." "Did you do this, too, after Harold Bishop?" She smiled, but it held more wisdom than humor. "Oh, yes. For weeks after I left him, I tortured myself with every memory, every interaction. I was convinced that if I could just identify the moment where things went wrong, somehow that would make the pain more bearable." She paused, taking a sip of her own tea. "It doesn't, of course. The past doesn't change just because we understand it better." Below us, the garden reception was underway, transformed from a wedding celebration into something else entirely. The sound of laughter drifted up, not the polite, formal laughter of a wedding, but something more genuine, almost rebellious. "Listen to that," my grandmother said, nodding toward the sound. "Every person down there is celebrating your courage, not mourning your loss. Do you understand how remarkable that is?" I thought about it, about how this day could have gone differently. "I could have gone through with it," I admitted. "When I saw that message, I could have pretended I hadn't. Could have walked down the aisle, said my vows, lived with the knowledge." "But you didn't." "No." The word felt strong on my tongue. I couldn't. Not just because of the betrayal, but because I deserve better than a life built on lies. My grandmother reached across the space between us and gripped my hand. Her skin was paper thin with age, but her grip was strong. "There it is," she said softly. "That's the moment I've been waiting for." "What moment?" "The moment you stopped thinking about what you lost and started thinking about what you deserve." She squeezed my hand. "It's the difference between being a victim of circumstance and being the author of your own story." A fresh wave of tears spilled down my cheeks, but they felt different from the ones I'd shed earlier. These weren't tears of loss or humiliation, but of recognition, of seeing myself clearly for perhaps the first time in years. I let myself become smaller, I realized, the words coming slowly as the truth crystallized. Not just with the dress today, but in so many ways. I stopped taking on controversial environmental cases because Nathan said they might affect his career prospects. I dropped my plans for opening my own practice because it didn't fit with his timeline. I even changed how I laughed because he once said my real laugh was too loud. My grandmother's face hardened. Men like Nathan and Harold Bishop before him, they don't want partners. They want accessories. Pretty, accomplished accessories that make them look good without outshining them. She set down her teacup with a decisive clink. "But you, my dear, were never meant to be an accessory." The truth of her words resonated deep in my bones. I thought about the cases I'd wanted to take on, the changes I'd wanted to fight for. Somewhere along the way, I'd let those dreams become secondary to Nathan's ambitions, had convinced myself that supporting his goals was the same as pursuing my own. "The worst part," I said, "is that I'm not even sure I really knew him. The man I loved, did he even exist? Or was he just a carefully crafted character designed to win my trust?" "Perhaps," my grandmother replied. "That's not the most important question right now. Perhaps the more important question is, in trying to love his illusion, did you lose sight of yourself?" The question hung in the air between us as the last light faded from the sky. Below, someone had turned on the garden lights, creating a magical glow that transformed the wedding decorations into something new and unexpected. Just like me, I realized. Just like this day. I want to go down there, I decided suddenly. Not to hide up here and lick my wounds, but to join the people who chose to stay, who chose to support me. My grandmother stood, offering me her arm with a regal smile. "Then let's make an entrance, my dear. Show them all that reflection doesn't mean retreat." As we made our way toward the stairs, I caught a glimpse of myself in a hallway mirror. The woman in the emerald dress looked different from the bride who'd started this day. Less polished, perhaps, but more real, more herself. The garden reception was in full swing when David found me again. I was standing near the transformed dessert table, where my sister's suggestion of smashing the groom's cake had evolved into something of a therapeutic activity. Guests were taking turns demolishing the elaborate chocolate creation that had been meant to reflect Nathan's sophisticated tastes. Each crack of the fondant felt like breaking another chain that had bound me to him. "Grace," David said softly, his bow tie now completely undone. "I know your mother said to wait until tomorrow, but there are things you need to know, things that might help make sense of all this." I studied him for a moment. David had been part of our lives for 3 years, Nathan's best friend and confidant. How many secrets had he kept? How many lies had he witnessed? But there was something in his eyes now, a need for absolution perhaps, or maybe just the desperate desire to finally tell the truth. "Walk with me," I said, gesturing toward the illuminated garden path. The fairy lights strung through the trees cast gentle shadows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that felt appropriate for uncovering hidden truths. We walked in silence for a moment, the sounds of the reception fading behind us. Finally, David spoke. "It started before he Met you. The plan, I mean. Nathan had been looking for someone like you, someone from a prestigious law family, someone with the right connections. He had a whole list of potential candidates. The words hit me like physical blows, each one revealing a new layer of calculation in what I'd thought was a chance meeting. The charity fundraiser, I said, the realization dawning. He knew I'd be there. David nodded, unable to meet my eyes. He'd done his research, knew you were passionate about environmental law, knew you'd be at that particular event. He spent weeks studying your cases, your public statements. He wanted to be able to engage you in meaningful conversation about your work. My stomach churned. Every early conversation we'd had, every moment I'd thought we were discovering shared interests and passions, it had all been carefully orchestrated. And the other woman? I forced myself to ask. How long? She's been in the picture? For 5 years, David admitted. They met in law school. She works at Callahan and Associates now, the firm that's Nathan's main competition for corporate clients. Their relationship, it was always part of the plan, a way to have inside information from both firms. I stopped walking, my legs suddenly unsteady. A nearby bench provided refuge as I processed this new information. So, I wasn't just a stepping stone to my father's firm, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I was part of a larger strategy, a pawn in some kind of corporate espionage game. David sat beside me, maintaining a respectful distance. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that Nathan must have developed real feelings for you along the way. But watching him today, seeing how quickly he dropped the act when his plan fell apart. He trailed off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. When did you realize? I asked. When did you know for certain that none of it was real? 3 months ago, he replied without hesitation. I overheard him on the phone with her, laughing about how well you were playing your part. How perfect it was that you'd suggested a smaller wedding, making it more cost-effective. He said. David paused, clearly reluctant to continue. Tell me. He said you were like one of those environmental impact studies you were so passionate about, a necessary step to get what he really wanted. The casual cruelty of the comparison stole my breath. I thought about all the times I'd shared my passion for environmental law with Nathan, all the cases I'd discussed, the injustices I'd raged against. Had he been internally laughing the whole time, seeing my dedication to protecting the environment as something to be exploited rather than admired? There's more, David continued, his voice heavy with the weight of long-held secrets. The timing of the wedding wasn't random. Next month, your father's firm is handling the merger between Hayes Industries and Global Tech. It's the biggest environmental compliance case of the year. The pieces started falling into place. And Callahan and Associates represents the opposition, I finished. So, between me and his girlfriend, Nathan would have had access to both sides of the case, inside information that could be worth millions. David pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. I have proof, conversations, emails. I've been gathering evidence for weeks, trying to decide what to do with it. I stared at him, a new understanding dawning. You left those messages unsealed on his phone on purpose, didn't you? You made sure I would see them today. He nodded slowly. I couldn't bring myself to tell you directly. Coward's way out, I know. But I figured if you saw it yourself, on today of all days, I would have no choice but to act, I finished. The realization should have made me angry. David had orchestrated my discovery of the truth in a way that would cause maximum drama. But somehow, I felt oddly grateful. The public nature of the revelation had forced me to be strong, had prevented me from trying to hide the truth or make excuses for Nathan's behavior. For what it's worth, David said, standing up and pulling a USB drive from his pocket. I've copied everything here. Emails, messages, recorded conversations, everything that proves what they were planning. It's yours to do with as you see fit. He placed the drive on the bench between us. Consider it a wedding present, just not the one I originally planned to give. I picked up the drive, its small weight feeling impossibly heavy with the truth it contained. Why now? I asked. Why not weeks ago, before all of this? David looked out over the darkened gardens, his profile lit by the string lights. Because 3 months ago, when I first realized the full scope of his plan, Nathan told me something. He said that after the wedding, after he made partner, he was going to make sure you focused on more appropriate cases. No more environmental crusades, no more fighting corporate interests. He was going to redirect your career to suit his needs. He turned back to me, his face etched with regret. That's when I knew I had to stop it. You're too good at what you do, too passionate about making real change. I couldn't watch him take that away from you. The knowledge settled over me like a heavy cloak, not just the truth about Nathan's deception, but the realization that even people who had enabled his lies had seen my worth more clearly than I had. I stood up, clutching the USB drive like a talisman. Thank you, I said simply. Not for waiting so long, but for making sure I found out before it was too late. As we walked back toward the reception, I felt something shift inside me. The I. Questions that had been haunting me all day. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind, suddenly seemed less important? The real question now was, what would I do with this truth? The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my clutch as I made my way back to the reception. The weight of its revelations pressed against my mind, demanding action. But what kind of action? The lawyer in me, the real me, not the diminished version I'd become, was already cataloging possibilities, strategies, consequences. I found myself drawn to the small meditation garden adjacent to the main reception area. It had been one of the reasons we'd chosen the Grand Laurel as our venue, though Nathan had dismissed it as a bit too zen for his tastes. Now, sitting on a stone bench beside the small reflecting pool, I could appreciate its peaceful energy, without his judgmental overlay. My father found me there, 2 glasses of scotch in hand. He'd loosened his bow tie and rolled up his sleeves, a rare sight for a man who believed in maintaining appearances at all costs. Thought you might need this, he said, offering me one of the glasses. I accepted it, watching the amber liquid catch the light from the paper lanterns overhead. David told me everything, I said. About Nathan's plan, about the Hayes Industries merger, all of it. Dad's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of his surprise. That explains Bradley's rapid resignation, he said after a moment. He must have known the whole house of cards was about to collapse. The thing is, I continued, taking a small sip of scotch, I keep thinking about the cases I've handled, the times I've represented communities fighting against corporate environmental violations. How many times I've seen companies try to manipulate the system, try to buy their way out of responsibility. I turned to face my father fully. I've spent my career fighting against exactly the kind of corruption Nathan was planning to facilitate. Grace. No, let me finish. I stood up, energy suddenly coursing through me. All this time, I've been handling individual cases, fighting one battle at a time. But what Nathan and Callahan and Associates were planning, using personal relationships to gain insider information, manipulating environmental compliance cases, it's not just about one merger. It's about a systemic problem in how environmental law is practiced. My father's eyes narrowed slightly, recognition dawning. You're thinking about the Independent Oversight Committee position. He was right. 6 months ago, I'd been offered a seat on the State Environmental Law Oversight Committee, a newly formed body designed to investigate and prevent corruption in environmental law practices. I'd turned it down because Nathan had convinced me it would take too much time away from building our life together. "The position is still open," I said. "Sarah Martinez told me last week they haven't found the right candidate." I began pacing the small garden, ideas flowing faster than I could process them. With what's on this drive, with what I know now about how firms like Callahan manipulate environmental compliance cases, I could make real change. Not just fight individual battles, but help reshape the entire system. My father took a thoughtful sip of his scotch. "It's a big step. The committee position would mean leaving the firm." "I know." I stopped pacing, facing him directly. "And I know how much it meant to you, having me join the family practice. But Dad, I think this is why everything happened the way it did. Today. This is why I needed to see the truth before it was too late." To my surprise, a smile spread across my father's face. "Grace, when you were 5 years old, you organized a protest because the neighborhood kids were throwing trash in Mrs. Henderson's koi pond. You made signs, recruited other children, even wrote a letter to the homeowners association." He stood up, placing his hands on my shoulders. "You've always been a fighter for what's right. I just got caught up in the idea of legacy, of passing on the firm to you. But maybe your legacy needs to be something entirely your own." Tears pricked at my eyes, but these were different from the ones I'd shed earlier. These were tears of recognition, of being seen, truly seen, by someone who loved me. "The committee meets in Washington," I said softly. "I'd have to move." "Then move." His voice was firm. "Start fresh. Show them all what Grace Chen can do when she's fighting at full strength." He glanced back toward the reception. "But maybe make the announcement tomorrow. I think your mother can only handle one major life change per day." A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. Real laughter, not the polite chuckle I'd trained myself to use around Nathan. "I need to make some calls," I said. "Sarah's number is still in my phone, and if I remember correctly, the committee has an emergency session next week about the Hayes Industries merger." "Use my office," Dad offered. "It's quieter than out here." He pulled a key from his pocket. The key to his private office in the Grand Laurel's business center, where he'd been planning to handle any last-minute wedding day legal emergencies. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. As I turned to go, he called after me. "Grace, I'm proud of you, not just for what you did today, but for what you're about to do." I clutched the USB drive tighter, feeling its edges press into my palm. The truth it contained was no longer just evidence of betrayal. It was ammunition for change, a tool for transformation. Nathan had intended to use my passion for environmental law against me, to manipulate it for his own gain. Instead, he'd inadvertently given me the key to making the kind of impact I'd always dreamed of. Standing in that peaceful garden, wearing a green dress that symbolized my first act of rebellion, I felt more certain of my path forward than I had in years. The day had started with me preparing to say "I do" to a future built on lies. It would end with me saying "I will" to a future of my own choosing. My father's office in the Grand Laurel's business center was exactly what you'd expect. Leather chairs, mahogany desk, law books lining the walls. It was a space designed to project authority and tradition. But as I sat at his desk, phone in hand and the USB drive plugged into his laptop, I felt anything but traditional. "Sarah, it's Grace Chen." I was surprised by how steady my voice. "And yes, I know it's my wedding day. Actually, that's part of why I'm calling." Over the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything. The corruption I'd uncovered, the planned manipulation of the Hayes Industries merger, the systematic abuse of environmental compliance procedures. I could hear Sarah Martinez, head of the State Environmental Law Oversight Committee, shuffling papers on her end of the line, her occasional sharp intakes of breath telling me she understood the magnitude of what I was revealing. "Grace," she said when I finally finished, "this is explosive. The implications for environmental law practice across the state, possibly the country. She paused. The committee position is yours if you want it, but you need to understand. Once you take this step, there's no going back. You'll be making enemies of some very powerful people. I looked down at my emerald green dress, at the way it caught the light from the desk lamp. I understand completely, and I'm ready. More than ready. The emergency session about Hayes Industries is Wednesday morning. Can you be in Washington? By then? 4 days. 4 days to pack up my life, arrange for a temporary place to stay, prepare my presentation for the committee. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like freedom. I'll be there. As I hung up the phone, a soft knock at the door made me look up. Olivia stood in the doorway, holding a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. Your mom said you were in here plotting something. Thought you might need reinforcements. I waved. Her in, watching as she settled into one of the leather chairs and poured us each a glass. I just accepted the committee position, I told her. I'm moving to Washington next week. Instead of the surprise I expected, Olivia just smiled. About time, she said, raising her glass. I've had a go bag packed for you in my trunk for the past 3 months. You what? Grace, honey, I love you, but you've been dimming your own light for way too long. I knew eventually you'd remember who you really are. I just didn't expect it to happen quite so dramatically. She took a sip of champagne. Though I have to say, your timing is impeccable. Nothing says fresh start quite like blowing up your own wedding. A laugh escaped me, real, full-throated, and completely unladylike. Nathan would have hated it. That thought just made me laugh harder. I need to make a few more calls, I said, pulling out my phone again. The Hayes Industries legal team needs to know their merger approval process might be compromised. Olivia raised an eyebrow. You're going to call the Hayes legal team? Tonight? No time like the present. I started dialing, then paused. You know what's funny? 3 hours ago, I was supposed to be having my first dance as Mrs. Nathan Porter. Instead, I'm about to throw a wrench into a multi-million-dollar merger and probably make myself the most hated person in corporate environmental law. Sounds like a much better evening plan to me, Olivia grinned. Want me to stay for moral support? I shook my head. No, this I need to do alone, but could you tell my mom I'll need help packing up my apartment tomorrow, and maybe see if Rachel can start looking at short-term rentals in Washington? Already on it, Olivia said, standing up. Rachel's got 3 possibilities lined up, all walking distance from the committee offices. And your mom's already called her friend at Washington National Cathedral about joining their environmental ministry committee. She paused at the door. We all knew you were meant for bigger things, Grace. We were just waiting for you to remember it too. After she left, I turned back to the laptop, where I'd been reviewing the evidence from the USB drive. The scope of the corruption was staggering, not just Nathan's planned manipulation of the Hayes Industries merger, but a whole network of similar schemes, all designed to help corporations bypass environmental regulations. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. You have no idea what you're doing. This isn't just about us anymore. Think about your career. For the first time, since I'd seen that fateful message on his phone this morning, I felt no pain reading his words, no twist of heartache or regret. Instead, I felt something that surprised me. Gratitude. His betrayal had set me free, not just from a fraudulent marriage, but from all the compromises and concessions I'd been making. I typed out a response. You're right. This isn't about us. It's about something much bigger. And as for my career, watch me. Then I blocked his number. Standing up, I smoothed down my dress and gathered the USB drive and my notes. The reception was still going on outside. I could hear the music floating up from the garden. My non-wedding celebration had transformed into something else entirely, a launch party for my new life. As I headed for the door, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me wasn't a victim or a jilted bride. She was a warrior preparing for battle, a phoenix rising from the ashes of what was supposed to be her perfect day. And she was smiling. Dawn broke over the city 3 days later, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded me of the wedding that wasn't. I stood in my half-packed apartment, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise through windows that no longer held. The curtains Nathan had insisted would pull the room together. The space felt different now, emptier, but somehow fuller of possibility. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind of activity. My mother, ever the efficient crisis manager, had orchestrated a team of friends and family to help pack up my life. Every drawer opened, every closet sorted had revealed another way Nathan had subtly reshaped my world. The clothes I'd stopped wearing because they were too bold. The books he'd suggested I move to storage because they cluttered the aesthetic. The art pieces I'd loved but had taken down because they didn't fit his vision of sophistication. "What do you want to do with these?" Rachel asked, holding up a stack of legal journals. They were filled with my notes and annotations from cases I'd wanted to pursue. Environmental justice cases that Nathan had discouraged me from taking on because they weren't career-advancing enough. "Those are coming with me," I said firmly. "Actually, put them in my carry-on. I want to review them on the flight." My sister nodded approvingly. "Now that sounds like the Grace I remember. The one who used to stay up all night building cases to protect endangered habitats." The sound of a key in the lock announced Olivia's arrival. She burst in carrying 3 garment bags and wearing a determined expression. "Okay, I've got your power suits for the committee meetings, casual business wear for day-to-day, and one knockout dress for when you inevitably end up being interviewed. About taking down corporate environmental corruption." "I haven't taken down anything yet," I reminded her, but she waved off my protest. "Please. I saw your face when you were making those calls the other night. You're not just going to serve on this committee, you're going to revolutionize it." She hung the garment bags carefully before turning to face me. "Oh, and I stopped by your office at the firm. You should see Bradley Porter's face every time he has to walk past your empty office. It's like he's swallowed something particularly unpleasant." The mention of Nathan's father brought an unexpected wave of emotion, not regret or sadness, but a fierce determination. I thought about all the times he'd patronizingly praised my little environmental cases while pushing for Nathan's advancement. How many other talented lawyers had been pushed aside, their passions dismissed in favor of corporate interests? A knock at the door revealed David, looking somewhat uncertain, but carrying a box of files. "These are copies of everything related to the Hayes Industries merger," he said, "including some things that weren't exactly officially documented." I accepted the box, noting how our interaction felt different now. Not the awkward tension of shared guilt, but the professional exchange of allies working toward a common goal. "Thank you. This will help with my presentation to the committee tomorrow." "Grace," he hesitated. "Nathan's been asking questions about the USB drive, about what you're planning. He's worried." "Good," I replied, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "He should be." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of packing tape and bubble wrap, of sorting through the physical remnants of a life I was leaving behind. My mother appeared around noon, carrying lunch and a determined expression. "The movers will be here at 4, she announced, setting out containers of my favorite Thai food. "Your father's arranged for your car to be transported to Washington. The short-term rental Rachel found is furnished, but we've arranged to have some of your favorite pieces shipped once you find a permanent place." She paused, studying my face. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question carefully. "Lighter," I finally said. "Like I've been carrying this heavy weight of expectations and compromises, and I'm finally setting it down." "You know," my mother said softly, "when you were little, you used to tell everyone you were going to save the world. You had such big dreams, such fierce convictions. Then somewhere along the way—" I started dreaming smaller, I finished, making myself fit into someone else's version of success. And now? I walked to the window, looking out at the city I'd called home my entire life. Now I'm dreaming big again, but this time, they're my dreams, my goals. No compromises. The afternoon brought more helpers, cousins, friends, even a few colleagues from the firm who'd chosen to align themselves with my cause rather than Nathan's. Each person who showed up with boxes or packing tape felt like a confirmation that I wasn't just running away from something, but running toward something bigger. As the movers began loading boxes into their truck, I found myself in my bedroom, now stripped of everything except the memories. The wedding dress still hung in its garment bag in the corner. I hadn't been able to face dealing with it yet. Olivia found me staring at it. Without a word, she unzipped the bag and pulled out the dress. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "there's a women's shelter downtown that takes wedding dress donations. They sell them and use the money to help women start new lives." She met my eyes in the mirror. Seems fitting, doesn't it? I touched the delicate lace one last time, remembering how it had felt like armor that morning, before everything changed. "Perfect," I said. "Let's do it now, before we head to the airport." My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Martinez. "Committee members excited to meet you tomorrow. Bring everything you have on Hayes Industries. Time to make some waves." Looking around at my dismantled life, at the friends who had become my army of supporters, at the wedding dress about to become a tool for helping other women find their strength, I felt a surge of excitement. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. And this time, I was writing the story. Washington, D.C., greeted me with an unseasonably warm autumn morning, the kind that made the Capitol's marble buildings glow like they were lit from within. I stood outside the State Environmental Law Oversight Committee building, my presentation materials clutched in one hand, a coffee in the other, trying to calm my racing heart. "Ms. Chen?" A voice called from behind me. "I'm Lisa Rodriguez, Sarah Martinez's assistant. She asked me to show you to the conference room early. There are some people she'd like you to meet before the session begins." I followed Lisa through the imposing building, its corridors humming with purposeful energy. She led me to a large conference room where 3 people were already gathered around a table covered in documents. Sarah Martinez rose to greet me, her firm handshake and direct gaze exactly what I'd expected from our phone conversations. "Grace, welcome to Washington. Let me introduce you to James Wilson from the Environmental Protection Agency and Dr. Catherine Patel from the Center for Environmental Justice." Sarah's eyes held a glimmer of excitement. "They've been reviewing the evidence you sent over and, well, I'll let them tell you." Dr. Patel spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades in environmental advocacy. "Ms. Chen, what you've uncovered, it's not just about one merger or one firm. The pattern you've identified, the way certain law firms are systematically undermining environmental protection regulations. It matches cases we've been tracking across multiple states." James Wilson nodded, pushing a folder toward me. "We've been trying to build a case for years, but we could never prove the connection between the firms. Your evidence, especially the communications about the Hayes Industries merger, could be the key to exposing the entire network." My hands trembled slightly as I opened the folder. Inside were dozens of cases, all following the same pattern I'd discovered in Nathan's files. Law firms working together to manipulate environmental compliance cases, using personal relationships and insider information to help corporations bypass regulations. "The committee session this morning isn't just about Hayes Industries anymore," Sarah said, watching my face carefully. "We're proposing the creation of a special task force to investigate corruption in environmental law practices nationwide, and we want you to lead it." The coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. "Lead it? But I just got here. I haven't even officially started with the committee." "Exactly," Dr. Patel interjected. "You're not entrenched in the system. You've proven you're willing to stand up to corruption, even when it's personally costly. And your background in both corporate and environmental law makes you uniquely qualified to understand how these schemes work. Before I could respond, Lisa reappeared at the door. Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here asking to speak. With Ms. Chen, says it's urgent. She hesitated. It's Claire Thompson from Callahan and Associates. The name hit me like a physical blow. Claire Thompson, Nathan's other love, his real partner in both romance and corruption. I looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. I think you should hear what she has to say, Sarah said quietly. Sometimes allies come from unexpected places. Claire was waiting in a small meeting room, her designer suit and perfect makeup a sharp contrast to her obvious nervousness. She stood when I entered, and I was struck by how young she looked, probably fresh out of law school when Nathan had drawn her into his schemes. I know who you are, I said, remaining standing. Why are you here? Because you're not the only one who's tired of being used as a pawn in someone else's game. She pulled out a thumb drive, placing it on the table between us. Nathan. He told me it was all about fighting corrupt corporations, about finding creative ways to ensure environmental justice. By the time I realized what we were really doing, I was in too deep. I studied her face, looking for any trace of the manipulation I'd become so familiar with in Nathan. Instead, I saw something I recognized. The same awakening I'd experienced at my almost wedding, the same determination to make things right. There's more, she continued. Other firms, other lawyers like Nathan, building their careers on undermining environmental protections. It's all documented here. She gestured to the thumb drive. I've spent the last 3 days gathering everything I could access at Callahan. Consider it my own declaration of independence. A knock at the door revealed James Wilson. Sorry to interrupt, but the committee's gathering. And Grace? The press is here. Apparently someone leaked information about the task force proposal. Claire stood straighter. That would be me. I figured the more public eyes on this, the harder it would be for them to shut it down. She turned to me. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'd like to help. I know how they think, how they operate. Let me help you take them down. I thought about the folder of cases I'd just reviewed, about the scope of corruption we were facing. This wasn't just about Nathan anymore, or even about Hayes Industries. This was about changing the entire system. The task force will need inside knowledge, I said slowly. Someone who understands the networks, the relationships. I can give you that, Claire said quickly. All of it. No more secrets. No more schemes. Looking at her, I saw not the other woman, not Nathan's co-conspirator, but another lawyer who'd lost her way and was fighting to find it again. Sometimes, I realized, the most powerful allies are the ones who've seen the corruption from the inside and chosen to fight against it. Sarah appeared at the door. Grace, it's time. The committee's ready. I picked up the thumb drive, adding it to my folder of evidence. Come on, I said to Claire. Let's go tell them exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. As we walked toward the committee chamber, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. A week ago, I'd been preparing to say my wedding vows. Now I was preparing to testify before a state oversight committee, with my would-be husband's former mistress as my unlikely ally. Life, I was learning, had a way of taking unexpected paths, and sometimes those paths led exactly where you needed to go. 1 month after my non-wedding day, I stood at the podium in the National Press Club, facing a room full of journalists. The task force's preliminary findings had made waves in the environmental law community, and now it was time to make them public. My emerald green dress, the same one I'd worn on what should have been my wedding day, had become something of a trademark, a symbol of transformation that the media had latched onto. 6 weeks ago, I began, my voice steady and clear. I discovered evidence of systematic corruption in environmental law practices. What began as a personal revelation has grown into something much larger, a widespread investigation that has uncovered a network of law firms and corporate interests working together to undermine environmental protections. The cameras flashed as I continued, outlining the task force's discoveries. Behind me stood my team, Claire Thompson, now our key insider witness, Dr. Patel, whose decades of research had helped us connect the dots, and a group of dedicated lawyers and investigators who'd worked tirelessly to build our case. As of this morning, we have filed formal complaints against 12 law firms in 8 states, I announced. These actions represent just the beginning of our efforts to restore integrity to environmental law practice. The questions came rapid fire after my statement. One in particular caught my attention. Ms. Chen, sources say you discovered this. Corruption on what was supposed to be your wedding day. How has that personal experience influenced your approach to this investigation? I paused, considering the question. A month ago, it would have made me uncomfortable, perhaps even defensive. But now? What happened on my wedding day forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth, I replied. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about love, about success, about who we are, can blind us to reality. I had dimmed my own light, compromised my values, all in the name of fitting someone else's narrative. That awakening, painful as it was, helped me recognize similar patterns of compromise and corruption in our legal system. The reporter pressed further. And your former fiancé? Any response to his firm being named in today's complaints? This investigation isn't about personal vendettas, I stated firmly. It's about protecting our environment and upholding the law. My personal history with one of the involved parties only helped me understand how these schemes operate. But the evidence speaks for itself. After the press conference, Claire found me in my office. The view of the Capitol dome through my window still felt surreal sometimes, a daily reminder of how much had changed. You've seen the response from Callahan and Associates? She asked, handing me a press release. They're claiming we're driven by personal grievances, trying to discredit the investigation. I skimmed the document, noting the familiar defensive tactics. Let them, I said, setting it aside. The evidence is solid. We have documentation, witnesses, a paper trail that spans years. They can attack our motivations all they want. The truth will stand. Claire settled into one of my visitor chairs, a thoughtful expression on her face. You know, I barely recognize myself from a month ago, the woman who thought she had to play along with corruption to succeed in corporate law. She shook her head. It feels like a different person. I know exactly what you mean. I moved to the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The woman who was willing to smile and nod while her fiancé dismantled her dreams. Sometimes I want to shake her, tell her to wake up sooner. But she did wake up, Claire pointed out. And look what she's accomplished in just 1 month. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Just saw you on the news. Your grandmother is telling everyone at her bridge club that her granddaughter is dismantling the patriarchy one corrupt law firm at a time. I smiled, remembering the pearls I'd worn on my wedding day, the symbol of feminine strength that had helped me find my voice. Those pearls now sat in a frame on my wall alongside the first article about our investigation, a daily reminder of how endings can become beginnings. Ms. Chen? My assistant poked her head in. The environmental science students from Georgetown are here for their meeting, and Dr. Patel sent over the latest analysis of cross-state violation patterns. I gathered my materials, feeling the familiar surge of energy that came with diving into our work. Ready? I asked Claire. She stood, straightening her jacket. You know, a month ago, if someone had told me I'd be working with my ex's former fiancé to expose corporate corruption, I would have thought they were crazy. A month ago, if someone had told me that standing up at my own wedding would lead to heading a federal task force, I would have said the same thing. I paused at the door. But that's the thing about transformation. It rarely looks like what we expect. As we walked to the conference room, I caught our reflection in a glass wall. Two women who had once been pawns in someone else's game, now leading a movement for change. The Grace Chen in the reflection stood taller, spoke louder, dreamed bigger than the bride who'd started that fateful day in a wedding dress. Sometimes, I said to Claire, the best transformations come from our worst moments. We just have to be brave enough to let them change us. 6 months to the day after my non-wedding, I stood in my grandmother's garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in the same colors that had decorated the grand laurel on that fateful morning. The roses were in full bloom, their scent carrying. On the warm evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, wind chimes played a gentle melody. I'd flown home for the weekend to celebrate my grandmother's birthday, but also because I needed this moment, needed to stand in this place where generations of strong women had found their truth and faced their futures. My grandmother's pearls hung around my neck again, not as a symbol of traditional expectations, but as a reminder of the strength that runs in our family's blood. I thought I'd find you out here. My grandmother's voice came from behind me. She joined me at the garden wall, her presence as steady and comforting as ever. You always did like to think among the roses. I was just remembering, I said, touching one of the blooms gently. You told me once that every ending is just a different kind of beginning. I didn't really understand what that meant until my wedding day. She smiled, the wisdom of years shining in her eyes. And what do you understand now? I took a deep breath, letting the evening air fill my lungs. That sometimes the life we think we want isn't the life we're meant to have. That our worst moments can become our best decisions if we're brave enough to learn from them. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of change and challenge. The task force's work had expanded beyond our initial investigation, uncovering patterns of corruption that stretched across the country. We'd faced threats and pushback, attempts to discredit our work, and pressure to back down. But with each challenge, I'd found myself growing stronger, more certain of my path. Did I ever tell you, my grandmother said, settling onto the garden bench, that the day I left Harold Bishop at the altar, his mother called me a fool. She said I was throwing away my chance at a comfortable life, at social status and security. I sat beside her, smoothing my emerald dress, the same one I now wore to every major announcement or victory, my own personal symbol of rebellion and rebirth. What did you say to her? I told her I'd rather be uncomfortable and true to myself than comfortable and living a lie. She patted my hand. Sound familiar? I laughed softly. You know, Nathan sent me an email last week. His firm is under investigation, his career is in shambles, and he wanted to tell me he finally understands what he lost. Not just me, but his integrity, his chance to do something meaningful with his law degree. And how did that make you feel? I considered the question carefully. Sad, in a way. Not for what I lost, but for what he never understood. That real love, real success, they can't be built on lies. They have to grow from truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. The garden had grown darker, but small solar lights began to twinkle among the flowers. My mother's birthday gift to her mother, a modern touch in this traditional space. It seemed fitting somehow, this blend of old and new, just as my own. Life had become a blend of traditional legal practice and revolutionary change. You know what the biggest surprise has been? I asked, more to myself than my grandmother. Finding out that my voice is strongest when I'm speaking not just for myself, but for something bigger. Every time we expose another corrupt scheme, every time we protect another community's environmental rights, I feel more like the person I was always meant to be. That's because you've finally stopped trying to fit your dreams into someone else's frame, my grandmother observed. You're creating your own picture now. She was right. The task force had grown into something I could never have imagined. 6 months ago, We weren't just investigating corruption. We were changing how environmental law was practiced, creating new standards for corporate accountability, inspiring a new generation of lawyers to prioritize justice over profit. And, personally, I'd found a kind of happiness I hadn't known was possible. Not the carefully curated contentment I'd convinced myself to feel with Nathan, but something wild and real and entirely my own. My apartment in Washington overlooked a small park, and every morning I watched the sunrise paint the trees gold, reminding me that each day brings new opportunities for growth and change. "Grace," my grandmother said softly, "I want you to have something." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a phoenix. "I bought this the day after your non-wedding. Do you know why?" I touched the pendant gently, feeling its intricate details under my fingertips. "Because a phoenix rises from the ashes?" "Because a phoenix doesn't just rise, it transforms. It takes what could have destroyed it and turns it into something beautiful." She fastened the necklace alongside her pearls. "Just like you did." Standing in that garden, wearing both the old pearls and the new pendant, I felt the truth of her words deep in my soul. 6 months ago, I'd thought my life was ending. Instead, it was transforming, taking everything that could have broken me and turning it into something stronger, something truer. "The stories we tell matter," I said finally, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Not just the ones we tell others, but the ones we tell ourselves." For too long, I told myself a story about fitting in, about being the perfect bride, the perfect partner, the perfect lawyer. But the real story, my real story, was waiting for me to be brave enough to tell it. My grandmother stood, offering me her arm with the same grace she'd shown on my wedding day. "And what story are you telling now?" I smiled, linking my arm with hers as we walked back toward the house where family and friends waited to celebrate. "A story about truth, about transformation, about discovering that sometimes the most beautiful moments in life come not from following the path we're given, but from having the courage to forge our own." Above us, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, each one a point of light in the vast unknown. Like those stars, I realized, we all have the potential to shine. We just have to be brave enough to let our light be seen.